What if I told you that the exhausting corporate loop you call daily life is not a natural biological byproduct of human existence on this planet, but a highly calculated and deeply invisible psychological conditioning program designed specifically to keep you perpetually racing for the next urgent paycheck? Welcome to Money's Hidden Past. Rich people lied, we fact-checked. Today, we are dismantling the unvarnished rules of escaping the rat race and exposing what the global education system intentionally failed to teach your generation. When you look at the standard modern global education system, you are blindly taught to believe it was created to maximize your intellectual potential. But the historical fact check completely proves it was architecturally designed to mass-produce highly compliant factory workers for the Industrial Revolution. You spend the first 2 decades of your natural human life being systematically trained to obey arbitrary bells and respect absolute corporate authority, asking for physical permission just to use the basic public restroom and completely surrendering your independent critical thinking to the rigid curriculum. This intense psychological conditioning perfectly prepares you for the corporate machine where you will eagerly trade the absolute best hours of your waking existence for a highly restricted fixed salary that barely covers your biological survival, while the wealthy executives at the top extract the massive surplus value of your labor. Whenever you listen to the mainstream media or the traditional financial advisors, they desperately want to convince you that your ongoing financial struggle is simply a temporary baseline problem of not generating enough monthly income, forcing you to obsessively focus entirely on climbing the corporate ladder. They loudly promise that if you just work significantly harder for the next decade and successfully secure that highly coveted middle management promotion, you will finally achieve the beautiful financial freedom you constantly dream about. But this is the absolute most dangerous and devastating mathematical lie of the century. The cold historical fact check reveals that earning more money solves absolutely nothing because the vast statistical majority of human beings suffer from a severe systemic disease formally recognized across the behavioral economic landscape as lifestyle inflation, where every single increase in personal revenue is instantly matched by an increase in spending. The exact moment an ambitious corporate employee receives a highly anticipated promotion, they immediately choose to aggressively upgrade their physical transportation, walking directly into an expensive dealership and signing a predatory auto loan, completely transforming their brand new abundance into a permanent structural liability. They quickly decide that their perfectly functional apartment is no longer socially acceptable, so they sign a massive 30-year mortgage on a significantly larger house, requiring thousands of dollars in new monthly maintenance and utility expenses, and violently chaining themselves to a piece of real estate they cannot actually afford. They completely mistakenly believe they are successfully building a highly prosperous lifestyle, but they are actually merely continuously increasing the baseline cost of their own survival, becoming deeply and permanently trapped by the highly demanding maintenance of their possessions and forcing themselves to run significantly faster just to stay exactly in the same place. This is the true invisible mechanical architecture of the modern money trap. You are aggressively conditioned to signal your growing societal success by purchasing luxury goods voluntarily, handing your hard-earned liquid capital directly back to the massive corporate monopolies, and ensuring that you remain entirely dependent on the corporate machine to simply survive the massive international banking cartels completely perfected this extraction process by heavily inventing the modern, highly gamified mathematical credit score system, which brilliantly convinces the working class that going into massive high-interest debt is actually a highly responsible and mature sign of absolute corporate citizenship. They actively train you to completely obsess over maintaining a perfect digital 3-digit number, not because it actually represents true structural wealth or independent financial stability, but because a high credit score proves that you are a highly reliable and heavily obedient debtor who will consistently pay the massive corporate interest rates without ever complaining to the authorities. And to make the absolute extraction of your liquid capital even more invisible and seamless, the global technology monopolies heavily transitioned the entire economy to a massive subscription model where you no longer permanently own your software, your music, or even your physical heated car seats. You simply aggressively rent the basic temporary right to exist inside their massive corporate ecosystem. These completely invisible $10 and $20 monthly digital charges slowly bleed. Your account's dry, acting like thousands of tiny invisible financial leeches permanently attached to your central bank account, guaranteeing that even if you completely stop aggressively shopping for physical retail luxury goods, the massive corporations are still mathematically extracting your future wealth on the first of every single month. This brilliant, highly calculated combination of gamified debt and permanent digital subscriptions completely ensures that the massive global consumer class never successfully accumulates enough escape velocity, leaving them completely financially stranded in a state of permanent heavy exhaustion, and absolutely dependent on the very same corporate system that is actively destroying their mental health. If you accidentally lose your corporate job in this highly inflated and heavily leveraged state, your entire massive financial house of cards violently collapses in a matter of weeks. Because you completely failed to build any true underlying structural wealth, you simply built an incredibly expensive and highly fragile illusion of modern success to successfully break free from this exhausting psychological financial hamster wheel. You must completely understand that the global economy is rigidly divided into two distinct categories: an absolute unyielding structural barrier separating the vast global army of passive consumers from the highly calculated and deeply disciplined elite class of asset producers. The massive population of passive consumers spends the vast majority of their limited daily human existence and their highly scarce financial capital constantly acquiring things that other people have manufactured endlessly, scrolling through digital social media feeds designed by brilliant corporate engineers and purchasing highly temporary digital entertainment to briefly escape their own miserable reality. Every single time a consumer clicks a digital advertisement or buys a video game, they are silently and aggressively draining their personal generational wealth, willingly transferring their physical life energy directly into the pockets of the producers, and happily financing the multi-billion-dollar empires of the global technological elite. The highly disciplined asset producers operate on the absolute inverse mechanical frequency of capitalism. They absolutely refuse to spend their limited daily hours consuming empty digital calories. They spend their time aggressively creating tangible structural economic value, obsessively mastering highly profitable skills, and building independent commercial businesses. The asset producer looks at the highly chaotic global internet not as an entertainment machine, but as an absolutely infinite digital distribution network for their own physical products. They invest their hard-earned capital strictly into cash-flowing assets that produce automated returns, quietly building a massive invisible architecture that generates money while they physically sleep. Escaping the modern rat race fundamentally requires you to violently flip your daily behavioral ratio by consciously shifting your primary psychological identity from a distracted consumer to a focused producer. You naturally and instantly stop spending massive amounts of money because you are far too busy building your own machine while simultaneously scaling your absolute income because you are creating massive value that others will eagerly pay for. When you are aggressively writing software code or recording highly educational digital content, you literally do not have the physical time to blindly wander through expensive retail shopping malls. Your intense, massive focus completely shields you from the manipulative corporate marketing campaigns, allowing your liquid capital to naturally compound inside your private investment accounts, which brings us directly to the absolute largest financial secret on planet Earth. The supreme underlying rule of wealth accumulation that absolutely nobody teaches you in school because the corrupt, massive financial institutions desperately need you to remain completely blind to it. The undeniable mathematical reality that wealth is the exact gap between your income and your ego. We are aggressively and continuously taught by modern corporate advertising to visually display our financial success, to broadcast our highly elevated social status by purchasing expensive European designer clothing and wearing highly visible luxury mechanical timepieces that cost more than a traditional college education, desperately seeking the temporary validation of completely random strangers walking down the physical street. The massive global rise of the modern, highly filtered digital social media landscape has completely accelerated this psychological financial destruction to an absolutely unprecedented scale because you are no longer simply trying to compete with the ordinary neighbors on your physical street. You are aggressively trying to visually compete with the highly manufactured lifestyles of global billionaires. Every single time you aggressively open the glowing screen of your expensive cellular device, you are instantly bombarded with highly manipulated digital images of tropical vacations and private jets, creating a massive synthetic sense of deep personal inadequacy and biological social failure that absolutely can only be temporarily cured by purchasing another heavily overpriced consumer product. But the cold, unvarnished historical fact check absolutely proves that true sustainable wealth is exactly what you do not see. It is the massive pool of highly liquid capital that was explicitly not spent on the imported fancy car. It is the massive digital investment portfolio that quietly sits in the background generating compound interest, while the actual owner drives an incredibly boring and completely standard 10-year-old sedan. If you aggressively study the actual daily habits of the true self-made multimillionaires, you will frequently find them wearing completely unbranded and incredibly cheap cotton clothing, because they completely understand that purchasing expensive luxury brands is a massive tax on the highly insecure, and they absolutely refuse to trade their personal financial freedom for a temporary illusion of status. The absolute ultimate cheat code to complete and total financial freedom is mastering your own psychological ego. If you can completely and entirely stop caring about the superficial opinions of your temporary peers, you instantly strip away the primitive biological desire to buy massive things you do not physically need, completely starving the consumer matrix of its aggressive power to dictate your daily behavior. Lowering your internal ego allows you to permanently compress your external living expenses, intentionally widening the protective financial gap between what you earn and what you consume, and successfully using that massive excess capital to buy the absolute only asset that actually matters: the complete, total, and sovereign ownership over the hours of your own daily time. The incredibly rich people sitting safely in their corporate television studios want you to remain completely addicted to the massive illusion of societal status. Because an individual who is deeply obsessed with looking wealthy is incredibly easy to politically control, they are mathematically forced to accept bad corporate terms and tolerate miserable working conditions. When you have a massive expensive mortgage and a highly demanding luxury car payment, you absolutely cannot look your toxic corporate manager in the eye and aggressively tell him, no, you are completely legally bound to endure the daily abuse and the exhausting mandatory overtime because you are permanently trapped under the heavy, crushing weight of your own expensive lifestyle choices. But the quiet producer who aggressively controls their ego and lives significantly below their mathematical means possesses an absolutely terrifying level of untouchable structural corporate power because they possess what the highly prestigious financial community refers to as absolute walk-away money. The liquid capital required to simply stand up and completely leave any toxic environment without an ounce of fear. They can comfortably survive for multiple calendar years without receiving a single corporate paycheck, giving them the absolute sovereign ability to completely dictate the terms of their own human existence. They can completely choose to decline highly profitable contracts if they simply do not like the client, or they can take a massive 6-month sabbatical to focus entirely on their own physical health. This is the absolute terrifying freedom that the traditional massive corporate system desperately wants to prevent. They engineered the entire societal rat race to ensure that you completely exhaust your biological energy, chasing a completely artificial digital green line that absolutely never brings you any permanent satisfaction, while simultaneously blinding you to the highly beautiful reality that enough is actually a mathematical destination. You must deeply and aggressively train your mind to view every single consumer purchase through the cold lens of freedom, recognizing that buying an unnecessary massive luxury item today is absolutely not a harmless personal reward, but a highly calculated vote to aggressively extend the duration of your own financial imprisonment, and a direct massive transfer of your precious life energy into the deep vaults of the corporate elite. To successfully build the massive invisible machine that will ultimately buy your absolute freedom, you must completely embrace a highly boring and deeply unglamorous period of intense mechanical sacrifice. You must be completely willing to look temporarily unsuccessful to your highly judgmental social circle, while you quietly aggressively hoard physical assets and build highly resilient secondary income streams. While your incredibly exhausted peers are blindly financing depreciating physical liabilities, you are actively acquiring productive global equities, building software algorithms and scaling digital platforms, patiently assembling a massive mechanical army of financial soldiers that work for you 24 hours a day, completely replacing your reliance on the fragile and highly unpredictable traditional corporate salary. The modern rat race is absolutely not a physical place with actual metal bars and highly armed guards. It is a purely psychological and completely invisible digital cage that you actively lock yourself inside every single time you aggressively surrender to the highly manufactured corporate expectations of success and completely forget that the ultimate human luxury is the quiet peace of absolute financial autonomy. The path to true, sustainable geopolitical and personal power requires us to completely outgrow the childish propaganda and forcefully look at our personal global finances through the cold, absolute lens of structural engineering, building a highly resilient sovereign life where your massive daily production heavily outpaces your consumption, and using the massive resulting capital to buy your absolute total liberation from the corporate boardrooms. If this deep dive into the hidden, unvarnished mechanics of escaping the modern corporate rat race and the terrifying absolute reality of how your ego is systematically weaponized against your wealth fired you up about deeply taking absolute total control of your own permanent massive financial architecture, then do me a massive favor. Right now, smash that like button to let the algorithm know this factual, historical conversation matters. Share this video with every friend and family member who needs to understand how the real financial world operates. Let us keep exposing the true mechanics of wealth and power. I will catch you in the next one, where we break down the next hidden chapter in the long history of money and corporate authority. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, and remember that the absolute ultimate massive status symbol will always be absolute control over your own time. completely independent of the noise and the false promises of the massive modern consumer herd.